Hey, it's Bucky again here. I wanted to talk to you today more in depth and really break down the mechanics of what a lease option is. Oftentimes you hear that word and you may be a seller or you may be an investor and you really just don't understand it completely. There's certain mechanics involved in this process that you want to be sure you're aware of. And that's the purpose of today is just really break down how we buy houses, fast and often, with cash to help people out in these situations. Okay. So if you go to Wikipedia, we can use this as a reference quick off. A lease option, it breaks down a lot of different information here, some reference articles, talks about an example here. You can read through this on your own time. It gives reasons for using a lease option by both buyer and seller. But essentially what this is for us, it gives us an option to tie up the property with you for a given amount of time. And we'll break down the more benefits of the buyer and seller. We won't read off Wikipedia. We'll go by, kind of our process and what we use and what we learn by. Okay. So for example, here's a lease option purchase agreement. This is one of many different ones we may use depending on the situation or state it may be in. So different states have different regulations. So you always need to check with that. As you can see, there's a lot of terms and conditions and things in here. And, you can go through the whole contract if we want to, but we're not going to read all this. Okay. So my goal through here is really just to break down the key components that's involved in a lease option. Okay. So what would make it a viable lease option? Okay, there's elements that are required to be met in order for this to be a contract that's legal and binding. Okay, so these are the elements that you must have. Okay, the contract must be in writing. Okay, you cannot do a handshake or a verbal agreement. It's not enough. It won't hold up in court. It won't hold up in any situation. It just won't work. So never enter any agreement by a verbal or even a handshake. Another key thing is all parties whose name is on the title must be included on this contract. Okay. So, for example, in Oklahoma, there's husband and wife, both parties will have to be included on this contract because it's required by the state of Oklahoma to sell real estate. And both husband and wife have to sign off on it. So they would have to be included in here. In certain situations, if it was say a transfer deed and, there was multiple people on that deed who it was transferred to, then we would have to have all those people who was included on the title to be listed on this lease option. Okay. So the best bet is do your research, figure out who's all in the title, and that's who needs to sign this contract. Okay. And you need to understand, basically that. Another key thing is you need to have the location of the property, right? It doesn't help just having people's name on here. You have to have the location of the property. It has to be written down. I always like to include the legal description. It's definitely just never hurts, right? A property address is really just used by the United States Postal Services. Everything in real estate goes by the legal description. Okay, and that's how everything's identified by the land records. So it all goes off the legal subscription. So property address, legal description. Okay, even if it's just raw ground, just put the legal description. Because there is no address probably. Okay. Another thing to put down is the consideration. The amount of the consideration will be in the option of the contract. Okay. This is what makes a contract legal, a binding contract. Usually the consideration is money. Okay. So what am I meaning by consideration? Okay. It's basically what, when you are the buyer, you'll want to pay for this. Okay. But when you're the seller or the tenant, you want to pay 3 to 5% of the purchase price. So that's what the consideration is. Now, there's also a time frame. The time frame is written into the option of the contract. And this gives me as a buyer or other real estate investors as a buyer for a period of time to exercise this option. Okay, this time frame will have a date. Any time up to the date, the buyer may exercise this option. Okay, this means that even though the buyer may have a 5-year option, he can exercise it at any time before that date. Okay, if I decide to purchase the property 6 months into the option, there's nothing stopping me from purchasing that property and buying the property outright. Okay. Purchase price. In the option contract, it will state an agreed upon price. Okay. So what is a lease option? Let's break it down in more detail. Just as the name implies, a lease option incorporates two components. An option, the right to purchase the property for a specific price for a certain period of time, and a lease agreement. You have probably heard that the rent to own, which is what most people call lease option, negotiated the contract are the particulars of a term that has been agreed upon. A lease option is an excellent tool when you're trying to control real estate and create wealth. Gaining control over a property with relatively no risk empowers me as an investor and opens up immense opportunities for obtaining properties with very little money down. Okay. Now, I'm going to be frank and honest. We're going to talk about both benefits as a real estate investor and both benefits as you as a seller. Okay. So what's the difference between a lease option versus a lease purchase? Let's make this clear. There's a big difference between a lease option and a lease purchase. A lease purchase obligates the tenant and buyer to buy the property within the term of the lease, whereas a lease option gives the tenant buyer the right or option to buy the property, and the seller must sell. Okay, does that make sense? There's a lease purchase obligates the tenant and buyer to buy the property within the term of the lease, whereas the lease option gives the tenant and buyer the right or option to buy the property, and the seller must sell. Okay, that's still pretty muddy. Let's break it down with more detail. With a lease option, the tenant and buyer is not required to exercise the option and therefore is not obligated to purchase the property. Okay? With a lease purchase, however, the tenant buyer is obligated. As a buyer, we only do lease options. Okay? So just be aware of that. You know, whoever you're dealing with, if you're a seller, and when you're doing a lease option, it gives us as investors the most options to get out of it. So a lease purchase is probably the best route, but most investors aren't going to agree to that. Just being straightforward with you. So another term that gets really confusing with this is purchase option. Purchase option refers to purchasing the property with exiting the strategy of selling it on a lease option. Okay. So let's break this down into some more examples. Additionally, there's other components of a lease option. You have the same elements in a lease option contract as you would in a standard option contract. Okay. But you'll have details of lease payments. They'll be specified in the contract. Okay. The term of the lease will be in there. How long is the lease and can it be renewed? Additional monthly option consideration. So many of us investors will charge more money for rent and give credit towards the purchase if the option is exercised. There's also many other options that you can look at. If you want to be careful not to call out a credit in your contract, as this may give the buyer equal or equitable option in the property. Maintenance. There's usually something in there about maintenance that states who pays when something needs work. Okay. Benefits of a lease option. Okay, we're going to break these down as the benefits of both the buyer and the seller. There are benefits for both of us as the buyer and the seller. So let's break them down. Benefits as the buyer. The advantage of a lease option to a buyer who cannot qualify for a loan to purchase or doesn't want to tie up equity or capital to purchase a property that is going to take longer for a return on our money. So it's able to give me the opportunity to buy a property. We often help other individuals do this. If they have bad credit, we can introduce. We have lease options, sandwiches, and stuff that we do. And I hope it's not lunchtime and you're getting hungry when I talk about lease option sandwiches, but that's not what I'm talking about. So basically, the benefits as a buyer, it allows them, if they don't have credit, to be able to purchase a property and build his credit during that time of that lease option to purchase. Okay, so oftentimes for example, let's talk about this. So oftentimes we get a property, somebody that wants to sell, they're moving, they have no equity in their property, they don't want to rent it because they're moving out of town, they want to sell it, they just want to be done with it. So what we do is we'll come up with a lease option purchase, and then we will find a buyer that we vetted out, and we'll basically introduce them, and we'll create a lease option purchase with the seller that's getting ready to get out of town and the buyer that's wanting to rebuild and buy their first home and doesn't really care about equity. He just wants the home. And it's a win-win situation. So it helps us get creative with all our potential clients that want to work with us, and even, buyers that need homes, right? So this gives the buyer, a chance to rebuild his credit, purchase the property. Basically what happens, that buyer will refinance during that time period, and it appraises. Property typically appraises more by the time the option's done, and then it gives him a little bit of equity, and he can get the loan from the bank. So the difference as an investor, I gain financial leverage, right, with the lease options. It reduces my risk. I'm not tying up any of my money. I control very expensive piece of property with little or none of my own money without even owning it. Okay, so I'm just controlling the paper on it, but I am helping you. Most properties require 10 to 30% of purchase price down, right? And that's just the traditional way. I mean, if we do cash offers, we're going to give you the complete money. So there's just a way that we can leverage properties and help people out of situations without, tying up a ton of our capital when it's not a great return on our investment. Even if, I would go get a loan, it's much better to make money without loans, right? We don't like to go hard money loan on a property that has no equity. I mean, that's just not the way we do it, okay? So if there's no equity in your property, we're going to do a lease option with you, okay? We can accumulate equity faster because we're doing this through a lease option, okay? Additionally, you'll have the property showing up on debt, on your credit report. This itself will help you in another type of situation. As a buyer, you want to make sure the contract is assignable, okay? You may decide to just assign the contract. Sometimes this is called an assignment option. And that's what I was talking about. What we typically do is we'll do a lease option with our sellers, and then we'll assign them to a buyer, okay? Which is the awesome way to help people. It helps two parties. The more parties that we can help in real estate, the more people win. Okay, so basically what that's doing is saying, hey, Tim over here, he's got a home and he just got job transfer. His home has no equity. He doesn't work for a company that'll buy his property out. We got Jane over here. Let's call her a single mom, not to pick on moms that are single by no means, but she doesn't have a big chunk of money to put down on her property, but she wants to buy a nice home. She can afford this lease option is less than the rent she would pay. And she just needs a little bit more time on her feet to, get a traditional loan to buy out this lease option. So we basically introduce those two and take a small transaction fee for that. And that's it. So we've helped two different families out of their crisis situation. So it's a great deal for everybody here. Another thing, let's talk about the benefits of the seller. The benefits of the seller. As a seller, one of the advantages of a lease option is you can sell your property quickly, right? We want to sell it quickly. This is beneficial, especially in areas that are experiencing sluggish, economy where sellers have to wait a long time to get their houses sold. We're not really in that state right now, but when you're faced with I need to sell my home fast now, and you have no equity, nobody's going to buy your property. Okay, come to us. We will help you. We have options for you to buy your home, no matter what your situation is. So let's talk about an example. Okay, we have a great pool of buyers, both sides. With a lease option, you can ask top price and get it. Okay, so typical investors will charge higher market value and then add appreciation. Example would be a house is worth 110 to 116 according to comps, right? Comps are comparable homes that have sold recently. So if houses are appreciating 8% per year and you gave your tenant buyer a 2-year option to purchase the property, then the asking price would be 135. 116 times 1.08 is 125 times 1.08 makes it 135. Okay. As a seller, you typically ask 3 to 5% of the purchase price in non-refundable option consideration money. And what does this mean? Okay. You would ask between $400 and $6,500 to get the money out of the new buyer, right? So you don't want to risk your appreciation dollars and tying up a property that would be appreciating with somebody that's not going to be able to refinance. Okay. This allows you to generate more cash flow and charge a higher market value. Another benefit of the seller is you have a guaranteed rental income. Okay. You're going to get money from this property. It's going to cover your note in a little bit. Okay. We could go on and on and on about this. We're going to cut this off here and continue to part 2 later on. Hope you guys have liked it so far. Thanks again.